Talk shoes. Recorded live.
Welcome to the Continuous Delivery Podcast by SIA Technologies. My name is Faraz Syed, and I'll be your host for this episode. Today, Shamim Ahmed will be our guest. Shamim is the North America CTO for Continuous Delivery at SIA Technologies. In this episode, we will discuss how enterprise organizations are adopting continuous delivery as a software engineering approach to release software faster, cheaper, better. We will talk about the what, the how, and the why. Shamim, really good to have you here. Let me start by asking you a very simple question, but perhaps a bit complicated question. We hear terms like continuous delivery and DevOps often when it comes to software development. In your opinion and your experience, what is the difference between continuous delivery and DevOps?
Hey, great question for us. And first of all, thanks for having me on your show. You know, many of our executive customers often ask me that question. The way I look at it, DevOps is like a philosophy and a big picture framework of people, process, and technology best practices for how business, development, security, and operation teams can collaborate better to break down silos, reduce friction, eliminate waste, and increase velocity. DevOps includes practices such as continuous planning, continuous delivery, and continuous operations. So continuous delivery is really a sub-practice within the overall DevOps framework. So CD focuses on how we go from idea to production, or in value stream terms, requirements to release, just like you mentioned. And it includes sub-practices like continuous development and integration, continuous testing, continuous deployment, and continuous release. In many ways, CD is a great extension to Agile. Agile development focuses on how we increase the velocity of idea to code, fail fast and build high-quality software. Whereas CD extends Agile development to help our customers agilize the deployment of code from development to production, where it actually generates value.
Okay, excellent. I mean, I talked to Dan Rice in the previous episode about Agile and continuous delivery, so this is good to hear from what you're seeing in the market as well. So when you talk to these executives, I mean, what are some of the key impediments and obstacles that these organizations are having in achieving speed and quality and implementing continuous delivery in general?
Yeah, I've worked with and spoken to many, many customers, as you know, on our CD solution. And I'd say, most of our customers cite about 5 to 6 top impediments and obstacles. In no particular order, I would say number one is, cultural issues. For example, the whole impedance mismatch between, development and operation teams, right? The development team wants to go fast. The operation team's guys want stability. So there are impedance in terms of processes, mindset, skills and goals and metrics between these teams. Number two is around environment management, right? Particularly, how do customers set up test environments for staging and production? And this includes challenges around application deployment, environment provisioning, test data, and dependency on external systems. We see customers doing these kind of things manually, very, very labor-intensive and error-prone. The number three problem I tend to hear is around tools and technology integration. So if you think about customers, they have scores of development, testing, and deployment tools that sort of work in their own silos and are very, very difficult to integrate from a people, process, and data perspective. I'm actually working currently with a large telecom provider, and believe it or not, they've got 140 different tools in their environment, and they're now trying to rationalize all of that and trying to figure out, well, how do we sort of integrate the entire tool chain, right? So that's a big problem for many of our enterprise customers. Then we see problems around, budget constraints, right? So customers will tell me, well, it all sounds great, but how do I get the money to drive all these transformations? Because IT is always under pressure to reduce costs. And last but not the least, we hear about, senior management, lack of understanding and sponsorship for an exercise like this. For example, I'm currently doing a current state workshop for a very large energy customer in Houston. And they, what they tell me? They tell me that the management wants to be more agile about the releases, but they want to increase the budget. And again, there is very little tolerance for the inherent risk that comes from agilizing your deployment pipeline. That's a very interesting business conundrum, right? Business wants to go fast, and going fast, like you said, introduces potential quality risks, right? So there has to be an approach to how you manage risk as opposed to saying, I won't tolerate the risk that comes along with velocity.
Yeah, I mean, those are all good points, and frankly, I mean, I've had similar discussions with our customers, and those are some challenges. So, we understand what are those challenges, right? I mean, you kind of talked about, the business need to go faster, but yet companies are slashing their IT budgets, right? Because that is considered a cost center or overhead. So, what's your approach and recommendations to overcome these obstacles?
So in general, I propose a multi-pronged approach to this whole people, process, technology, and culture and organization perspective. So if you look at some of the obstacles you just mentioned, right? I think there are very well-defined solutions. Again, each customer is different. Their starting point is different. The journey will be different. But let's talk about a couple of these, right? For example, what you mentioned, the cost, right? So oftentimes we see our customers undergoing digital transformations, right? So they have investments going into the systems of engagements, which are all those mobile applications and customer-facing applications, and they're under tremendous pressure to reduce the cost on those systems of record. So my recommendation to them is, take advantage of DevOps to eliminate the waste in systems of record. Take the money out of those and invest that in systems of engagement, because that's where you need agility, and that's how you make it a self-funding exercise across the entire IT organization, right? So that would be an example of how we arrange the cost problem. But there are other solutions too. For example, if you think about the impedance mismatch that we talked about between developer and operations teams, right? So my view is that we sort of break down those silos and create system teams, right? System teams consist of the product owners, the developers, QA, security, operations folks, all in one team with shared goals and metrics, so they can collaborate throughout the life cycle as opposed to throw things over the wall, right? And I'm not saying that we should immediately tear down the classic organizational structure that we have, but all I'm saying is that we create teams, right, with representatives from these organizations so they can work better together, right? A good example is, for example, how we manage, application topologies for different environments like, dev, test, staging, and production, right? By leveraging topology modeling and automated process deployment solutions like CA release automation, or even tools like Puppet and Chef, we can actually help developers and ops folks to sort of work very closely together to define, manage, and evolve these topologies so that we get less problems from deployment issues, right? Number two is how do we ease the setup and automation of this environment? That is probably one of the biggest problems that I see for most of our customers, right? That includes things like infrastructure provisioning, application deployment, test data management, and all these dependencies on third-party systems, both internal and external, right? So we should definitely encourage our customers to look at, for example, container-based solutions like Docker, which provide a great way to package an application for portable deployments, right, into different kinds of environments. Similarly, they should look at test data management solutions that allow us to automate the provisioning of test data, and also like service virtualization solutions from either CA or HP or IBM and a variety of other vendors that allow us to virtualize these third-party endpoints, be they internal or external, and also reduce the dependency on the test environments of such endpoints, right? So you hear about companies like Google for us, right, that do multiple releases per minute, right? And they do that by completely automating the deployment pipeline. Now, I'd say most of our traditional customers probably won't need to support such levels of velocity, right? But we have financial services customers, for example, in Europe that have increased the release velocity 10x to support more than 10,000 deployments per month, right? So that's the kind of solution that we would like to advocate to our customers. There are other solutions too, again, depending on the customer context. Like we talked about tools integration, right? So as I said, many customers have scores of tools, hundreds of tools often, right? So I like to approach this problem by saying, okay, what you need to pick tools that support APIs that allow them to be integrated with each other, not only from a data perspective, but also from a workflow perspective. And the approach would be to really, build a platform where multiple tools can be integrated together. And that's going to be done using commercial and open source tools so that they can all coexist and work together.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of talked about the bank and financial customer in Europe, right, where they're releasing 10,000 releases in production. Now, I can see that for mobile applications or digital applications. So what's your advice in terms of, how do organizations start their continuous delivery journey for for not for the digital app, but for more for the legacy apps. Is that even possible?
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, every customer is unique, and they probably have their unique situations, and their journey will be different based on where they are currently and how they plan to drive their transformations, right? So, for example, as I said, for more of the backend applications like the systems of record, your backend systems, there the focus should really be on understanding where is the waste. For example, they have overheads around communication, overheads around excessive testing. Take the waste out, right? So look at maybe do a current state evaluation very objectively, identify the top impediments like the ones we mentioned that are standing in the way of reducing their cost and improving quality, and take the waste out, right? That would be one example of how to do this. I do this very frequently with my customers, where we do this current state workshops. We look at the current process and practices, people issues, and help derive a set of prioritized initiatives relative to their goals and ROI, right? And then I say, well, our customers should start small. Maybe start with one or two key applications and implement all these appropriate solutions, and then scale it up, right, across this enterprise based on the success of this one app, based on the learnings, right? So one of my key customers for us, that's going through a journey like this, is a very large automotive customer in Detroit. They started with one medium-sized application where they're implementing most of the continuous delivery solutions we just talked about, and they're already seeing significant improvements in quality and velocity, right? And this includes all the different layers of the stack, right? The front-end applications and the back-end applications. The management is now super excited, and so now other sister teams, want to emulate the success, right? That's a great example of how to embark on a CD journey, starting small and spreading the excitement based on success.
That's great. I mean, you mentioned, quality as one of the metrics. What are some of the other metrics? I'm assuming time to market and things like that. But, metrics that you can capture from the business perspective as well as from, software engineering perspective. What's your thought about the different types of metrics that can be captured as part of the continuous delivery program?
Yep, absolutely. So in addition to quality that you mentioned for us, I would say there are three other main classes of metrics. Number one would be velocity. Number two would be operational. And number two would be risk. So if you think about velocity, the key metrics you want to track are things like release frequency and lead time, and also business growth, right? For example, is your agility leading to increased revenue? Also want to measure the level of automation, and not just from a perspective of test automation. We're looking at automation from a process perspective, deployment perspective, everything, automation of every process area. Then from a quality perspective, obviously you want to capture how much defect leakage do you have in production? What is the mean time between failures? What is the mean time to recover from failures, right? What's the customer experience and response time, particularly for mobile applications, right? From an operations perspective, we want to measure things like cost and overheads. I talked about waste. You also want to measure things like employee productivity and satisfaction. So, as you know, we've had multiple research, most recently done by a research company, Coleman Parks, in collaboration with CA Technologies, that clearly showed that employee productivity, employee satisfaction, and employee retention are much, much higher with DevOps and CD practices than without, right? And this goes to show you why customers like Google, right? They have much higher employee retention. People want to work for a company like Google because they have eliminated all these overheads and processes that just simply get in the way of productivity. And last but not the least, the risk metrics, right? So this includes, compliance, right? Particularly if you're in regulated industries, right? You want to make sure that you've got, complete traceability between all of your process lifecycle steps, so that you can do automated auditing and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so let me ask you a $1 million question here. I mean, it all sounds great, right? I mean, I think if you look at organizations like Google, Facebook, they are starting from scratch, so they have an advantage in terms of how they define their culture. But let's take an example of automobile company that you were talking about, and this company, I'm assuming, is at least been around here 30, 40, 50 years. So companies like that, they have traditions, they have cultures, they have been doing things in a certain way for a long, long time. So how do you really change? How do you have that paradigm shift where you take, a process that's been in place and change and transform that process to be more agile or to adopt more continuous delivery related principles?
Yeah, this is one of the more difficult issues. People and cultural transformations are much, much more difficult than technology transformations. So I would say it's a multi-step process. I mean, as we already discussed, I say first thing, change things at the team level, right? Because that's the smallest unit of change. Have the customers adopt a systems teaming approach for implementing CD solutions. So break down the silos between the DevOps, the operations security teams, and bring them together to create a system team and have them build the best solution by collaborating together at the team level, right? That's typically the easiest thing to do because the whole idea around Agile is to create empowered teams that can make decisions, that can collaborate and work better together without having to break down the overall organizational structures, right? So, for example, this customer we talked about has a development organization and an operations organization, infosec organization. We're not saying that break those structures down, but take the people from those organizations and create these empowered teams that deliver a specific application or a solution, right? So start there. Then you sort of adopt industry best practices. For example, the scaled agile model or SAFe that you talked about in the previous podcast. So SAFe provides a very good body of practices from a process and technology and organization perspective that have been proven with multiple customers, right? Around how do you scale this thing up? How do you, for example, scale from teams to teams of teams to the program level to the portfolio level? What are the practices? What are the metrics that should go along with it? So my recommendation would be start with the team level, start small, but think big in the SAFe picture and gradually climb, the organizational change program like SAFe recommends, right? There are other models as well, but I would think SAFe is one of the better ones that I've seen.
Okay. Are there any key capabilities that these organizations are looking to implement as part of continuous delivery implementation?
Yeah, there are several. I would recommend there are at least 4 core capabilities that our customers should consider. Number one is what we call continuous configuration and deployment, which is all about managing the configuration and the topology of the different environments, right? Dev, staging, and production, and automation of the deployment across the whole pipeline, right, from dev to production. Number 2 is what I call continuous quality, which is all about embedding quality in every activity of the lifecycle. Like they say in SAFe, right, you can't scale crappy code. So if your code is not built right, there's no point, doing quality in downstream. So this would include, for example, the management of your requirements and code quality. It includes all form of testing, test data management, management of your technical debt, security assurance, and above all, in the digital age, customer experience assurance. In other words, how do you actually build systems with customer experience in mind? That's a key aspect of continuous quality. The third one I would say is continuous virtualization, which is all about taking advantage of virtualization across the lifecycle. And this isn't just about application virtualization or the service virtualization we talked about. This is about virtualization of applications, infrastructure, network, users, data, all of that, right? As you know, Bain Consulting has recently said that if you're not doing virtualization, it's going to be very difficult for you to do Agile, right? So virtualization, in my mind, is a key capability that our customers need to embrace. And the last one, core one, is I would say continuous data management, which is how we manage the delivery of databases, right? So most often when we talk about CD, we equate CD to software delivery, right? But applications, modern applications, inevitably include a database as part of the whole system, right? But the processes, the practices, and tools for database delivery is generally very different from that of software because you're dealing with data models and rollback is very different and so on and so forth. So we need a special set of processes to do continuous delivery of data and databases. And in some way, that is related to test data management as well. On top of these 4 core practices for us, I also recommend 2 value-added practices. Number one, was what I will call continuous modeling, right, where we take a model-driven approach to everything, such as requirements and tests and data and services and deployment, et cetera, et cetera. We hear about things like everything is code, right? Very popular term. In my opinion, in most cases, if something can be codified, it can also be expressed as a model from which code can be generated, right? So which means that instead of saying everything is code, we can now say everything is a model. Now, why is that important? Because modeling allows you to to do easier visualization of the artifacts, right? They say, a picture is worth 1,000, words, right, or 1,000 lines of code, and all of the dependencies and everything. So it allows to automate many processes. For example, you can now automate the generation of your test cases, the most optimized test cases from your requirements, or you can automate the deployment of your topologies and so on and so forth. So that's number one. And number two value-added practice I would like to say is continuous analytics, which allows us to do, analytics on the data we're collecting, from entire part of the life cycle. We're collecting a lot of data, right? Development data, testing data, deployment data, operations data. We want to be able to take the data and do some analytics on it so we can actually generate some insights that help us make smarter decisions, right? In my opinion, this is the sort of the key step in the next phase of the journey on DevOps maturity.
Yeah, that sounds great, Shamim. I know you and I have talked about this quite a bit, and we have also talked about the hubs concept, right? Having a apps hub and ops hub. I would love to set up some more subsequent episodes and kind of drill down into some of these core capabilities that you talked about, and also talk about the concept around analytics. But before we go there, let me ask you this. What's in your mind, what's the future of continuous delivery? Where do we go from where we are today?
Yeah, great question, and a really exciting question in my mind, right? So we see customers undergo digital transformation. That's the key thing that's transforming our customers' businesses, right? With increased emphasis on customer experience as a business imperative, as well as use of technologies like social, mobile, analytics, and cloud, right? So think about the Google car. It is loaded with systems that is doing continuous analytics all the time. It's an adaptive application, right? So it's constantly analyzing huge amounts of unstructured data, that data that is coming from the sensors, from the cameras, right? It's learning from them in real time and making decisions autonomously, right? I don't know if you're a big fan of autonomous driving or not, but I am. But regardless of whether we agree with autonomous driving or not, we are seeing a great shift towards autonomous systems, right? Autonomous applications, and this whole tendency to make use of big data so that systems can sustain themselves, and reduce the human burden around making decisions, right? We've already seen this a lot, for example, around business intelligence, but now we're seeing more and more of that happening in other applications as well, in the new digital age, right? So when you see these concept transformations happen, they also impose a lot of special requirements for next-gen application delivery. So which means that we need to transform the whole 3D process itself to become more adaptive, right? So if you think about the Google car again, it's a continuously learning application where it's constantly being fed data, right? So we need to sort of take advantage of those kind of things so that we can actually leverage these kind of lifecycle analytics to continuously optimize our processes, right? Because businesses is always going to ask us to go faster and faster and save costs. So the imperative then is, how can we become smarter by taking advantage of all this data we are collecting and make smart decisions? For example, how do we automate the automation itself, right? So that's what I really call intelligent DevOps, which in my mind is really the next step in the CD maturity journey that you were asking about. So I envision intelligent DevOps and intelligent continuous delivery will take advantage of all this data that we're collecting, along with these robotic process automation technologies to increase our velocity and CX, right? So we would think about self-healing automation, right? So when we think about automation today, customers, let's say, have very high degree of automation, but that automation itself becomes a bottleneck because it's difficult to keep pace, right, with change. So we would like to have systems that can self-heal, right? The automation becomes self-healing, or the virtual services become self-healing, or the topologies become self-healing based on application changes, right? That truly is really the exciting space, and that really is where I see where we're headed. By the way, I'm presenting a session on the subject at the upcoming CA World on November 15th. I'd encourage all of us to attend this session to learn more about really what's next gen for intelligent city solutions.
That's fascinating, Shamim. Love talking to you about these things. And folks, if you get a chance, if you are at CA World, please go listen to Shamim and attend his session. Fascinating stuff. Well, Shamim, thank you for being here. I know you and I are going to set up some more episodes and conversations here. Love talking to you about this. By the way, these podcasts are available on iTunes stores. You can search for Continuous Delivery 101 Podcast by SIA Technologies. With that, thank you again, Shamim. And my Twitter handle is @FuzzSyed, FuzzSyed. FUZZSYED. That's my Twitter handle. Stay tuned for the next couple of episodes. I'll be talking to Alex Martins on one of the core capabilities that Shamim talked about around continuous quality and continuous testing. Until then, take care and thank you.